just give a little bit of a background on you to tell those that have joined us, and then we'll get straight into the key questions that I'm sure many have as it relates to pricing and packaging of work.
Okay, well, just briefly, I'm originally from the US, which you can probably tell by my accent. I grew up in California and I moved to Europe in 2000. And I first went to Ireland and lived there for about 15 years. And I ran an art center there, which was a non-profit multidisciplinary space in Cork in the south of Ireland. And I stayed there until about 2015, and then I moved to Dubai to start working with Eastwing. And I was in Dubai for a year, and I felt that I could do more for the gallery being in Europe. Eastwing does not have a physical space now. We had a physical space in Dubai for a number of years, but due to different circumstances, we decided to go online. So now I basically run the gallery myself. I have an assistant. We work specifically online. We work with Artsy, but then I also look to partner with different organizations. I've done touring exhibitions that I've created with different organizations. I've curated Lagos Photo. I've curated a show for Format this year, and also for a small nonprofit here, which is called Alfred Ehrhardt Stiftung. So I've been both in the nonprofit side and the kind of commercial world, but not, we're not a blue chip gallery. We don't have a physical space. We aren't doing art fairs right now. So we're kind of looking at new ways to develop and sell work. But I started as an artist. I started as a photographer. So I've kind of been on both sides, both the administrator, developer side, as well as the artistic side. So I kind of look at things on both sides of the fence.
Mm-hmm. I mean, yeah, you sound like me as well. So that's the whole point of having these kind of conversations. The one thing that I've realized over the years is that a lot of photographers, when it comes to not only selling work, but even printing work, these have been reoccurring questions that have come up. So for me, I thought it was important to have this conversation and to also ask you, thank you so much for agreeing. You have a quite hectic schedule. But, a lot of the things that I think we're going to discuss today, I've noticed that it's often not something that's taught in schools when it comes to like selling work. I think a lot of artists and photographers are taught to make work, but they're not taught how to sell work. So a lot of it has been like trial and error. And for me, just from experience, I've had to learn a lot of these things firsthand, not because someone has taught it to me, but I had to sort of catch up quite quickly to have a better understanding of just, when we talk about valuation, editioning, how to market yourself, all these things. So we've had other sessions, looking at, for example, how to apply for grants, how to apply for competitions and so forth. And through these virtual talks, for me, it's sort of to address these key elements that I find a lot of photographers asking me the same questions. And it's not just, these lessons are not just only for us in the continent, but it's a global discussion. And I find that a lot of photographers, might not have that connection to the outside world or are still new in this field. So everything that we've been doing for the virtual programming, it's actually relevant for all photographers anywhere in the world, because we're all actually dealing with the same issues. So to start off with, I had, made some questions for you, but to just get started. So first of all, what I wanted to know, what are the factors that photographers should take into consideration when they're determining the value of their work?
I think the most important thing, we work in an industry that isn't like any other industry, especially for photographers, where organizations often, not always organizations, but people in general will think that we can do what we do for free. To create a body of work that has relevance, importance, it takes time, it takes materials, and it takes a lot of money. And so when you're getting ready to sell work from a project that you've made, I think you need to take into consideration how much time you've put into it yourself, where you are in your career in terms of what have you shown, what kind of interest has been shown to you, have you sold before, and start to use these different questions to think about the value. How do you value your work? Because at the end of the day, when you sell something, you want to feel like what you're getting, what you're bringing to the marketplace, you're bringing something back of value to yourself. And that means that you have to, I think as an artist, you constantly have to think about how you want to be seen, who, building a network of peers. All these things are very important. But I think when you're deciding on an image or a box set or whatever you're pricing, you need to think about who's your audience, and where is this going to be seen, and what is it going to take for you to get it there, and what are you going to walk away with. The artists that I work with, we have a lot of discussions about pricing work. And, I always make it really clear to them that, okay, there's certain things that the gallery is doing for you. We don't have a physical space, but we do promotion. We do create our Instagram feed. We do things to promote the artists. We approach institutions. We can work as a buffer for the artist and an institution. Or when someone is presenting an offer, we can come through and help bring a more professional front to something like that. So the gallery is always going to take a commission for that time, because we're doing that all the time. We have to value our time as well and our expenses. So, we always talk about what the commission is that the gallery takes. And then I always say, okay, now you need to go away and think about what's it going to cost? What does it cost for you to get to this point? And then how are you going to value the work that you're selling? So it's a lot of questions you have to ask yourself, a lot of sort of thinking about what are you going to be happy with when you make a sale.
Yeah, that's always the most difficult thing, I think, for artists, is to come up with that value. And for photography, one thing that I've noticed over the years is that because we're working in editions, people think like we can sell outside of the edition. It's just a matter of reprinting or something like that. So there's always, there's a lot of bridges to cross in that sense. So the next question is, how can emerging photographers identify their target market and position themselves in it?
Yeah, I've been thinking of that question. For me, I think it's really, really important for all artists to build a network of peers and professionals to start with, because it's through that network that you're going to be able to reach out and ask people questions when you want to get into a certain part of a field. So, I know there are really mixed feelings about portfolio reviews. I still feel that, I know it's a really, perhaps an older model, and maybe some people they think it's a ripoff, but I think if you have to, as an artist, know that when you go into any development opportunity like that, you have to think about what's the value of it to you? What do you want to put into it? And so if you're going to do a portfolio review, you should choose wisely. You should think about where you want to go. What is that particular organization going to provide you, and how much does it cost, and how much is it going to cost for you to get there? And by that way, you can start to build your professional network. I was fortunate. I started getting asked to review quite early on, and that's how I built both my professional network and the network of artists that I work with. But I think in terms of when you start to think about where you want to place your work, it's really important that you look, if there's a gallery that you're interested in, or you want to be represented by a gallery, start looking at who they're representing and see if you actually fit. Because that gallery is positioning itself for a certain collector base or a certain thing that they have put themselves together. So if a gallery is, say, based in the Middle East, and you're doing fashion that maybe has a lot of, like maybe you're working with nudes or something, that wouldn't be a gallery for you. You need to think wisely and really research it, and that takes time. Also, look at who they exhibit and how they exhibit. How do they treat their artists? That's super important. And I know that it's about positioning yourself in the market, but it's also thinking about who do you want to work with and how do you want to be seen. So I think that's really important. You need to respect yourself, and you need to respect your practice, and you want to work with people who are going to do the same. you want to be careful when like I think a lot of people just start approaching galleries because they think that's what they're supposed to do, and not thinking about when and where is the right time to do that. This is one of the benefits of some portfolio reviews. It's one time where these big galleries actually do make themselves available. But again, that's not the only way to sell work. You can also, depending on where you are, I know there's a lot of initiatives where artists are doing open editions, they're selling off their website, and they're making money that way. So it depends on how, again, how do you see yourself, and where do you want to see your work? Do you want to be in a New York gallery, or do you want to start on your own and then maybe work towards that? So I think it's about research, really.
Yeah, I mean, it's I think the key thing that you're speaking about is like networking. A lot of photographers don't understand the importance of networking, and that for me is the sort of the low-hanging fruit. So for example, there's many festivals. I was speaking about this the other day. There are many festivals that you can submit to without having to pay anything, and that should be like the marker of giving you like that first opportunity, because I think most galleries and institutions are looking at what all of us are doing as it relates to who we're exhibiting, who we're showcasing, what is the new talent coming out. So to me, the festivals are sort of easy access, and it's also an opportunity to see how the work engages with the audience. And often from festivals as well, that's where all the interest comes about. And sometimes, coverage, you can get coverage through that. There's all these other opportunities. But I think also, besides the festivals, when you're talking about finding the right gallery, because I've been approached by many galleries, and the first thing that I do is I look at the roster of who they have. And sometimes when you reach a specific career point, you'll be approached by everyone. But then for me, for example, I'm going to look at the list of artists and see if it makes sense. So if they have a bunch of, let's say, American painters, I know I'm not going to be a good fit because their clientele is, very in a very specific sort of selling point, or they're only selling paintings, so it doesn't make sense. And often I think, especially for photographers in Africa, there's always this push of trying to find a gallery outside, and then when the first opportunity comes, everybody's jumping on that instead of really stepping back and having an understanding of like what can the gallery do for them. Even having proper agreements, all these things are quite an important factor.
Super important.
Right.
And also the thing about festivals, I really agree with you that festivals are a good place to start in terms of starting when you're first starting out, if you can get into a festival. But I would also proceed with caution and make sure that your work is going to be handled properly, that if they're going to print it, they're going to print it well. Sometimes you take a chance and then your work is destroyed, or it's not hung properly, or it's not lit properly. I've seen that often. I've been with artists where they've arrived and their work has been stepped on, so it's something that you want to be cautious with. And also when the festival is over, what happened to your work? You need to know where that is. Is it returned to you, and who's paying for that? When you're walking into a festival situation, there's so many things you have to be aware of. Like, how are you getting the work there, or are they printing it on the spot? Are they returning it to you, or are they destroying it? If they're destroying it, they got to show you that they destroyed it. Because I have artists that I've worked with who find out that there's work in a drawer somewhere where they did a show 3 years ago, and it's still there. And then the gallery's like, well, we don't want to return it to you unless you pay. So then there's a whole conversation about that. So it's always about being really cautious and making sure you read agreements, making sure you have agreements, because sometimes, there's people who say, oh, we don't need an agreement. You need an agreement. Because running the Art Center in Ireland, I learned so many things about running a nonprofit and how I had to protect both the artists I worked with and the organization I worked for. And I still feel that way, that it's really important that you protect yourself, and that as running a gallery, that you protect the gallery as well.
Yeah, that's exactly. I think a lot of the times the agreement is, I think, the basis of everything. And now with new technologies coming around and stuff like that, I try to encourage people to use ChatGPT if you have questions as it relates to an agreement that has been sent to you, if you don't have someone that you can sort of share that document or that contract with. And often it's, so for example, for me, obviously I have my printing files, and then my other printer has the other files, but we have an agreement between the printers. So wherever the stuff is going to be printed, my whole thing is it's only printed in one place, unless I'm doing like a special project that is going to be printed at wherever the location is. So all of these, it's like, this is why it's so important to understand sort of your rights, contracts, the business side of it, which is basically what we're talking about. Because often I've had questions, I remember, from photographers who sold the print, and then the client asked for the high-res file, and that high-res file was sent. And I said, like, you don't do that. You don't sell your files. You know what I mean? I remember I had one collector who wanted like a high-res file, and I said, that's completely like unethical to ask for my high-res files. You already have the physical print, but why would you want the high-res files? So it came to a point where I basically told the gallery, like, give this person their money back, and I'll get my prints back, But so you understand what the rules and regulations are within the industry.
And I mean, I'm not sure why a client would ask for a high-res file when they're collecting an image, unless it would be to make another print if that print got damaged. That means they don't have an understanding of how photography works. So many people have not grown up with the negatives, like where I grew up with negatives. And so you had a negative and you could make a copy of the negative, but if you didn't make it, that was your original and you could protect it yourself. Where today it's everybody, there's a different way of dealing with photography. People consume photography now more than ever before. And I think they've lost that understanding. It's not as, it's still magic, but it's not as magic as it used to be, And I agree with you, if they're saying that they, the only reason I would think that someone would want a file of your work would be, like an excuse they might say is like, well, what if it gets damaged over time or it fades? I can make another one. They can contact you if it gets damaged. And if they contact you, then they have to pay for the printing of that new image and the shipping, and they have to show they've destroyed the old one. I mean, there's that stuff all the time. And just like working with a festival, if you do decide to work with a gallery, you need to know what the agreement is. How long are they holding your work? Are they going to hold prints? If they make prints, if they take you to an art fair, what are they paying for? Are you going to have to pay for the space on the wall? Because art fairs are expensive. Are you paying for the production, or are they paying for the production? Who's shipping it there? What happens after the fair? Where does it go? And these are things that I've learned the hard way, because I didn't have that kind of training when I first came into a commercial gallery. So I'm trying to, I try to be as aware as possible now in ways that maybe I wasn't in the beginning.
Yeah. I mean, for me, what I recommend is that if someone wants to show, let's say, what we do is that for the galleries, for the exhibition, obviously, we print it, but the shipment the gallery covers if it needs to be shipped. And then for the selling to the client, the printing cost is like divided between the gallery and the artist. So this is how we've been working. And then the shipment is obviously covered by the client, wherever that they want the work shipped. Now, another question I was just thinking about, and it's also related to the next question, is that I wanted to know from your end, what are the trends that you have seen as it relates to selling work? So, for example, photojournalism and fine art, it's sort of, it is within its box as it relates to how the market interacts with it. And I also believe that the pricing of photojournalism and fine art, there's a big difference within that. But to know from your opinion, I mean, if you're able to answer why there's a pricing difference. And also, my view is that I think more fine art photography is selling than photojournalism. This is my perspective, but I wanted to hear yours.
I mean, I think this is something I think about a lot, because the artists that I work with for East Wing, they all engage in really long-term research projects. Oftentimes they collaborate with scientists. Not always is that work something that somebody's going to want to buy and put behind their couch. So it's something to consider, and it's something I've been thinking a lot of, and I'm still trying to kind of figure out the right way of approaching it. For me, a lot of the artists that I work with, I feel that their work is better placed in an institution or in a collection that is focused on a particular theme. And I absolutely hear you about what we consider to be fine art prints versus what other people might say is photojournalistic, having a different value. Sometimes it's the content, it's what it's about. But then again, there can be a really poignant story that is began as photojournalism and becomes fine art, or and that's such an arbitrary, everything has a label, and I don't know that the label fine art is as important as it was maybe like in the 80s. For me, that felt like there was a much stronger divide when I was coming out of college. Like, that's fine art, that's photojournalism. Now I feel like it can mix, and also working with artists like Tanya Habjoka, who also include things like video in their work. I think that border gets blurred a lot more. Or Arco Dato, who works on very documentary subjects, but it's very beautifully shot. And maybe it started as an editorial piece, but it becomes a work of fine art. So in terms of trends, I don't have any big news. I think I'm hearing mixed reports from different galleries as to how sales are going right now. I've had people tell me that it's horrible. I've had other people tell me it's great. I think it's interesting, as artists are starting to utilize AI. What does that mean to editioned prints too? Like, do we still want to edition? Do we want to edition AI work? And if so, why? And then there's a whole discussion about authorship, and that this is all new. This is all brand new, and AI is a really important tool. It's a new tool, but where it fits in this whole art world is still kind of trying to figure itself out, I believe. I still think people. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt. No.
No, I was just going to say, I still think collectors, I think there's still a really strong percentage of collectors who want the exclusive piece. They want to say they own something and there's only 7 of them in the world. And oh, look, it's in the MoMA as well. But then again, there's a new generation coming up who are used to consuming or seeing work on screen. And so an edition print might not mean as much to them. Whereas in another time, another generation, or another personality type, that still holds great value. I saw a guy speak recently about how to buy prints. He has a book. He just had a book out. I'm sorry, I can't think of his name right now. But one of the things he asked the audience is, how many of you in this audience think you're going to buy a print or a painting and you're going to make $1 million in a certain period of time? And one person held up their hand, and he's like, the rest of you are right. The reason you buy work is because you have a relationship to it. That's the first thing that should drive you to buying work. That when you look at a print, you feel connection, or a painting, or a sculpture, or whatever type of artwork that you're collecting. It should speak to you, and that's where the first and most ultimate value should lie. But then, of course, there's always people out there who think, they're going to buy something and flip it and double the price. So, there's a lot of different audiences.
Exactly. That's the difference between the gallery and the art dealer. A lot of people get those two mixed up. The art dealer is less interested in your career and more interested on basically flipping it or making a buck from it. But the one thing that I've realized is that, for photojournalism, there's become more and more limitations on where to showcase. I think there's more fine art being showcased, in my opinion. And the one thing that I've noticed is that for those that are able to do it, for example, photographers that are working on long-term projects, and especially doing a visual narrative, the priority becomes making a book first, and then from the book it's easier to sell the print because it also gives you access to making an exhibition. I see that more and more for those in photojournalism, and less, this is my opinion, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I wanted to know your thoughts about, this, sort of this trend of getting a book made, because in the end, it also comes down to pricing. So for example, I found that photojournalism pricing is lower, but with a wider edition number, you know, whereas fine art, it's a higher value with a less edition numbering. And that for me, it's trying to, I guess, even understand how the market is perceiving it, because clearly, I mean, for you and I, for us, photography is photography. It's just what you're expressing within it. But unfortunately, in the market, you know, I've juried competitions where there was a big argument of what is photography, you know, what constitutes as photojournalism, what constitutes as fine art. But my argument is that it's still a form of expression. We're still using the same tool. We're just using it in different ways, you know. So, and even in the past, there's been questions if I was still a photographer, you know, and to me, I find these sort of comments quite comical, you know. But within that, I mean, what are your thoughts about that? I mean, as it relates to going for photojournalists and the pricing set marks.
I mean, again, I think if people see something in a newspaper, they might see it differently when they see it in a gallery space. But at the same time, I know a lot of artists who would be considered somewhat photojournalists, I think, and they're selling work in art fairs. So I think it depends. Again, it always depends on the collector. I mean, I was just thinking as you were talking, there's a collection in Italy of Donato Pizzi's collection, which is focused solely on Italian women photographers who were photojournalists, or they worked in photojournalism in some way. So there's a collector who only wants to buy from a very specific idea, a very specific collection that she is developing herself, because she feels it's important to amplify the voice of women photojournalists in Italy. And so again, I think it's really important. This is where it goes down to research again, and it's a constant thing where you have to look at who's out there, and it's not always easy to find them. But you know, there's all kinds of different collections. But also, I think as artists, we have to think about where do we want to see our work? You know, do we want to see it in a museum? Is it important for us to see it in a museum, or do we just want someone to have it who cares about it? And do we want to make it affordable? And in that way, do we need to edition? Is editioning important to us? Because the biggest problem that I think for so many artists is that, you know, they have a series and it goes really well. It might sell really fast, and you go into split pricing and you raise your price with each edition, but then suddenly those editions are gone. And if there's any further sale, you get no percentage of that sale. So, you know, sometimes it's worth considering open edition, but also if you consider open edition, then immediately this could knock you out of being collected by a museum, you know. Unless it has really strong cultural value. There's a lot to talk about in regards to that as well, in terms of editioning, if we want to move into that subject, about how to think about museum prints or artist proofs, or, you know, and what that means in the long run and how you can interpret it. But I think there are collectors out there who really, you know, that are very passionate about certain types of art, you know, and there always will be. I mean, it's like the photo book thing, you know, the photo book explosion hasn't been around that long, but now everybody wants a book. And oftentimes they don't think about the development of that object. And there's a couple of things to think about in that. And I don't want to delve into photo books too much because that's not what we're talking about today. But the thing that's really good about a photo book is it's portable, and you can give it to a curator. You can send it to them and hope they open it and spend time with it. And that's a really great marketing tool for you. I mean, I know that when I did In Transit, which was a touring exhibition in the US, I was so grateful because I had a catalog that I could hand to a curator, and I was able to build this tour based on that catalog. When people have a physical object, it helps. But it's also a very expensive endeavor unless you do something like print on demand for yourself and you kind of print it yourself. But I think it's really important, and I can't stress this enough, that when you are creating a book, that you really think about why do you need a book, and how are you going to do it in a way that you can both afford, and that's going to be an object that's going to serve you, because it will continue to serve you if you do it well.
Yeah, definitely. I think, when we talking about open edition or editioning, again, based on my experience, like real collectors are looking for editioned work because they want to know that they're buying into the scarcity model.
Absolutely.
And for that, for example, young photographers will have super high prices and edition of 3, and I'm like, it's ridiculous.
Yeah.
You just start your career. So my recommendation always is that at least start with 15 copies of 15 or up. But then, as the edition number increases, then the value decreases. As the edition number decreases, then the value is much higher. But when you look at the legends, for example, you look at Roger Ballen, or you look at Salgado, for example, they've reached a point in their careers that they can just say, I'm only offering 3 prints, because they've had that traction. They've been collected by museums. They've entered into international exhibitions. They produce several books and so forth. So for fine art, this has been from my recommendation. And then for journalism, I mean, the key thing is, even, we'll talk about pricing, is that when I started, my ultimate goal is I just wanted to get the work into the hands of as many people as possible. And that meant, to offer it at a reasonable price. But also it meant that over the years, the increasing of the value of that has to be like in a incrementally like conservative, because you also don't want to go above and beyond. So often I advise young photographers, don't, for example, I know in the festival there are photographers that, they said the printing value of their work was like $12,000, but they have barely had any international traction. And I was like, okay, that doesn't work, So from your end, I just wanted to know, what is a good price point to start with? I have my price point of what I think it should be, but for photojournalistic work and for fine art. And then the question, not only of editioning, but one thing that there's always an issue with is the number of sizes to offer.
Right. I mean, on editioning, I've talked to auction houses at length about that, because I wanted to make sure that I was advising artists correctly, and they agree with you that you shouldn't go crazy with your editions. That, I mean, they were saying around 7, but yet, I work with someone like Mandy Barker, who has, like, I think her editions are 12. And in the beginning, when, like, for instance, someone like Mandy, when she first started out, all the editions were the same size, but then as she grew in popularity, they became more expensive, mainly because, they were worth more, but also they were starting to sell out. And so I normally, when I work with artists with Eastwing, we normally keep the edition to around 7, and we usually have 2 sizes. Very rarely do we have 3, sometimes 3, but if we have 3, it's usually something that's very large and very limited. In terms of what sizes, I think you need to consider the work, because for some pieces, a giant print of something, it just doesn't work. So, you have to think about what is the message that the work is communicating. Is it something that's incredibly intimate and should be small, or is it something that can take 2 sizes, that can take 60 by 90, 80 by 120? That's usually what we go with, is usually a 60 by 90 and an 80 by 120. And then I have one duo that work together, and they do a 180 by 120, and that's very limited, because not many people are going to have a space in their house that can take that. And museums may be interested, but if you're, it's that saying, does it suit the work? Will that size suit a work that you've made? Can the material that you've used to shoot with, can it handle that size? The last thing you want to do is offer an expensive edition of 3 where it's incredibly pixelated and it looks dreadful. You also have to think about the kind of paper that you want to use, because that might change the price as well. If the paper is incredibly special, then or if you're printing on fabric, or if you're printing on metal, or, and I think, first of all, it goes back to the artist, and the artist has to consider, how do I envision this piece? What is it that I'm trying to say with the piece, and how can the material that I choose help me communicate this feeling that I have, as well as the size, as well as the framing? How do I want to present it? And all of those issues should go into deciding the base price, whatever that is. And also thinking about, where you are in your career. If you're first starting out, you might sell for a bit less, but as your work gains traction, yes, you raise the price. And and also I hear you when you say you raise the price, but you do it carefully, because you don't suddenly go, oh, I've just gone into edition 3, I'm bumping the price, and I've got an edition of 12 and I'm going to bump it 2,000 euros. You don't do that. You do it slowly. So it's just a lot of thinking. And also, I would also look at what you're saying around, what are artists that you feel you respect, and what are they selling their work for? And what do you think it's worth it? And start asking yourself those questions. And again, that question of what do you want to walk away with at the end? Because if you're selling on your own, that's great. You get to keep 100% after the, production. But if you're working with a gallery, they're going to take a commission, and they should be working hard for that commission. And if they're not, then you need to look at your agreement, But
oh my God. The more you talk, the more I realize, like, I need to make like another session just, when you talked about paper, because I have a printing facility here, but, and that's the thing, like a lot of photographers don't know what paper that they should print on. Because the value of your work is based on the archivalability of, if that is a word, of the paper. So if you're printing on bad quality paper, I mean, after 5 years, it's gonna fade.
Exactly.
Or there'll be some sort of.
And also, how many artists have seen their work printed today? I mean, so many people are so used to seeing their work on a screen. When you see work on a screen, light is passing through it. When you put it on paper, it's going to look really dull to you because light is bouncing off it. It's going into you're viewing the print with the light coming in, it's bouncing off. You're not, the dark and light that you see on a screen, to replicate that in a print, you need a good printer to be able to do that in a way that, you just got to learn to look at it. And so many, I've worked with artists where they see their first print and they start, they feel like they're going to cry because they've actually never seen it as an object before. Mm-hmm. And you are creating an object. That's part of what you're doing. It doesn't just live in your head, and it just doesn't live on, doesn't live on your computer alone. It's an actual object, and you've got to think about, how do I want to craft that? And how much do I want to be involved? Like, do I want to have a printer, or do I want to be hands-on and work with cyanotype and work on fabric and work on, and then depending on the materials you use, then you have to think about what's the viability of selling it. And, there's Megan Rippenhoff, who develops her film in the ocean, develops her prints in the ocean. She has a very special way of doing that. And so the prints are very large, and it's a very specific process. So she, I'm sure she has very in-depth conversations with her gallery about, how do we position this? Because it's fragile and it's rare and it's very special, but it's very much about her idea of what it is that she is presenting to an audience, and for herself, what she's communicating from herself.
Yeah, again, but just based on my experience, like when I first started out within the fine art, like I had, I think, 3 different sizes. The thing had 40 by 40, 80 by 80, and 1 meter by 1 meter. And barely no one bought the 40 by 40. And I understood like that work needed to exist in a larger format, which was the 80 by 80. And then for the 1 meter by 1 meter, obviously we reduced the, the edition numbering. So, like the conclusion I came to is that a real buyer wants to have that decent sized print to put up on the wall for specific reasons. So, sometimes young photographers will ask me, if, how many different sizes they should have, blah, blah. And I said, look, it's also an issue of managing the editions, because you have to manage the edition, you have to manage the sizes, you have to know who you've sold it to and which edition number has already been sold. And even someone was asking, they wanted to gift someone. And I said, well, you gift it from your edition lots. It's not, because often a lot of photographers don't realize that, you know, the world that we live in and the market that we're in, it's a very small market. There's been issues where the photographer, for example, has finished selling that edition for that size, and then somebody came to them and they decided to sell the same size, and that sort of entered into the market. That news got in, and that basically killed the photographer's career, you know, because it's about building trust. It's a trust between the gallery, the client, or, you know, the consumer, and then the photographer, and all of these have to go hand in hand. But the question I have for you is that if you finish an edition, can you open a new edition of a larger size or a different size?
This is really tricky, because there have been very famous artists who've done that, and they've been burned. They've gotten in a lot of trouble for that. It really depends on what you're doing. One of the things that I tell the artists that I work with is when they decide on the sizes and the editions, like once we go with that, rarely can you change it. And yes, you have to be very clear on what's going on with your editions. What are you pricing at? When you know, are you gonna have everything be the same price, or are you gonna do split pricing where after a certain edition the price goes up? If so, how much? And are you going to hold on to those last couple of editions and make sure they go where you want them to go? Once you've sold out an edition and a very prestigious museum comes to you and says, we want that, and you're like, oh, my editions are sold out. There are ways you can sell an AP to a museum, or a museum print to a museum, but you do not do that to another collector, because if you've limited your edition and then you start selling 20 APs and that collector finds out that his friend has it, he's not going to like it. But if he sees that it's in the MoMA or it's in another prestigious museum, that gives him more value, because he knows that's probably not going to ever be de-secessioned into, it's not going to be taken out of the collection of a museum. You know, once a museum buys things, they really have to have a good reason for taking it out of their collection. That stands for most museums. I heard recently that university museums can be different, and I need to research that. I just heard that this week, that if a university museum buys work that and I'm not saying this is true because I don't know, I need to research it. Someone told me that this week, that it's easier for them to deaccession their collection than a private, you know, a gallery a museum can. So I think it's really important to think about I'm going back to your question of, can you resize? I mean, I had an artist that worked with us who ended up doing a show with the New York Gallery, and they ended up making a giant print for that show at a very limited edition. And they sold a few, but they didn't sell too well because they were really, really large. You had to have a very specific space for that work. And I think the other thing that you have to remember too is collectors are also aware of the upkeep. You know, how are they going to keep that work safe if it's really huge? How are they going to store it? How are they going to keep it dry? How are they going to keep it from getting damaged or broken? Like a giant framed work is easily broken, where something that's manageable, you know, you might break the glass, but the print is more easily replaced than it would be. You know, you can go back to the artist and say, here's my certificate of authenticity. I have edition 3, but it's been damaged. Will you replace it for me? And I will show you that I've destroyed the one that's gotten damaged. But then the collector is responsible for paying the shipping and the production on that, if the artist is willing to do that.
Can you just briefly talk about what is AP and just define it for those that don't know?
This is something that's it's a commercial term in some ways. It comes from printing. So when a printer made an etching and they made a series of prints using a printing press, at the end of the editions, they would make some prints for themselves, which were APs. Then the printing stone would be broken. So when photography started to move into, you know, this, and this is my understanding from the people that I've talked to about this, when photography moved into the commercial market and started selling, they used this term AP. So it means artist proof, but it's a very loose term. So it's basically, it's supposed to be limited. Most people say it's 2 or 3. I've heard auction houses, I've discussed it with people from auction houses, and they're like, well, actually, an artist can have as many APs as they want, but they cannot be sold, you know, like in terms of it, you sell it to a very specific, like you would sell it to a museum if your edition is sold out. You know, you can sell it to an edition to a museum, you can call it a museum print. But that's not part of your edition. That's not part of the numbered edition. And you can't sell it indiscriminately. You know, like you can't have suddenly 100 APs after you've editioned at 20 or 15 or whatever you've decided your edition is. So it's a way, I think, to help artists continue to place their work in important institutions and not mess with the editioned works that they've created. But again, an AP is really a very specific thing, and it's such a strange term because it's absolutely nothing to do with photography at all. It's about printing.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just gonna go through some of the questions. Mustafa, I think some of it has been answered. Regarding print editions, are editions predetermined? Yes. When you build a collection, you determine what number of edition that collection will hold in itself. So if you decide that you're going to do 12 editions at a specific size, then you stick to that. And this is before you start showcasing or printing. And then it says, does it mean it needs to be a specific size for certain editions? No, I mean, to me, the way that I work is that I have a collection. From the collection, I have the sizes already determined for each image that's in each collection. So, for example, I'm not going to have, one large size for a specific image, and then the rest, I have different sizes. So it's just to maintain a consistency across the board. And usually, for example, edition 1, I keep it for myself. This is something that we started a few years ago. Mm-hmm. And then, we start selling from edition 2 forward, or we will allocate a specific edition to a specific gallery or an institution. But the important thing in the editioning of work is that you keep in that collection, that you keep a specific, you keep the whole collection of one edition of the whole collection to yourself, because you don't know who's going to come to you next. If a museum comes and they want to buy out the whole collection and you don't have, the work, or you don't have the sizes, this is just sort of like an assurance. For me personally, I've never sold my APs because I've always said this is the insurance for me. Mm-hmm. So I prefer to hold on to that for as long as I can. And then there says if he tries to sell a smaller or bigger size from a specific mentioned size in those printed edition, are they still part of the edition? Yeah. So for example, there are certain competitions that do these fundraisers. I don't know if it's called 10 by 10. The small prints.
Right.
And so for me, it can become problematic. Like when it comes to, let's say, a museum coming to you and asking, if you're selling, like, for example, there's these $100 prints for fundraising and so forth. To me, I think it's an issue because if somebody spent, $3,000 on obviously a larger print, and then all of a sudden they see this $100 print, I think it creates, some sort of issue. If you're going to engage in these kind of fundraisers or something like that, it has to be an image that's only dedicated to that specific activity.
I agree.
You don't get it into the other things. I don't know, Peg, what do you think about that?
No, I mean, I agree. I think I've discussed this with artists before, and I absolutely hear you. Again, it's that thing of where are you at in your career, and how has the image that maybe you want to give to a fundraiser, is that one of your key images? If so, you shouldn't give it to the fundraiser, even though you want to, I'm sure there's another image you can give to the fundraiser that might not be an editioned work that you don't have to edition every single thing that you make. Like, you can have another image from that series that maybe isn't part of your edition. You can make that for the fundraiser, I would also be really careful because during COVID, there was, and this is a very famous story, there was an organization, and I won't name it, that went through and bought a whole bunch of those really cheap prints, because there was they weren't really cheap, but they were much less than they would be if you bought directly from the artist, and it was for a very good cause. And they were going to do a show in their museum of these prints, and the artists were furious because they weren't going to get any money from that, and they weren't even going to be invited. It was just somebody whoever did it did not understand what they were doing and how it really messed with the whole ecosystem in the art world, which is, it's a construct. It's something that's been created to help sell work for artists. And I mean, everybody has mixed feelings about it. It's very fickle. It changes all the time. But when you do something like that, it really it devalues the artists and the work that they do. So I think, again, it's that thing of when someone comes to you and says, we want you to support this cause, can you donate a print? Absolutely. But make sure it's not one of your editioned works. And then you can make it whatever size you want. And then you've done that. You know that print is there. And if it's an open edition, that means you can sell it later as an open edition, I would imagine, and it wouldn't interfere with your editioned works. But your editioned works, once you set an edition, you really got to stick to it. Once you set a price, you really need to stick to it, even if it's tiered pricing. Yes, you can raise it as, if it becomes more scarce and you become more popular and there's a market. I mean, it's a market. That's what it is. But, and also be aware that a lot of museums and other specific clients may come to you and say, I want a museum discount. So keep that in mind when you're setting your prints, because you may want your work in that institution, but that institution also knows their importance. So they will come to you and say, well, we're blah museum and we want a 25% museum discount. And so that's going to hurt both you and the gallery, but it's something that it might be worth that investment, because then your work is going to be taken care of and shown somewhere of importance.
Yeah. No, I mean, I always say that the museum is your archivist, that there's a permanency in that. And that's why it's important to, like, for me, it's very important to get into museum collections. It's also very important to be written about in scholarly journals or publications relating to art, because it's a way that, the more attraction you have, that when people are researching your work in the future, that there's a place for it. But even, like for me personally, like, because I've done different types of commission work for different organizations, I will donate one of my editions. I will not make another work, you know what I'm saying? But I will only give them one to auction off for specific fundraising and so forth. But I think that the key thing is just, I think for photographers, especially here online, to know that, people in the industry are looking at everybody, so they know what exactly is going on, because that's sort of the work, that everyone has to do. So, to take care of like things that you guys get involved in or what you choose to engage with, because, there's traceability in that as well. And then for, so it says, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So the next question, I think we've already answered about the AI. Does the size of the work have an influence on the final selling price?
I mean, I would say yes, because you're talking about more materials. To get a 60 by 90 print is going to cost less than it costs to sell a large print. Also, again, that exclusivity, what is your edition and how available is it? So yeah, I do think that size makes a difference in terms of pricing and value, because not everybody, and that's something that you see a lot. Like if you go to different fairs in different countries, like if you go to fairs in Paris or in the Netherlands, the work that sells tends to be smaller work because the apartments are smaller there, and homes are smaller there, and storage is really expensive. So unless you're incredibly wealthy, you're not going to be able to manage, because, you're not going to have a place where you can store work.
Interesting.
It's something to think about,
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's, I think it's also some period of trial and error and so forth. So there's another question about if galleries obtain an exclusive right to sell a certain collection series of an artist and not the whole body of work, and not able to give collection to other galleries. Before you can respond, I want to respond to this. Yeah. My recommendation to all photographers is no one can have world exclusivity on your work, because no one has the world as a market, period.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So for me, I work by regions. So for example, my gallery in Dubai deals with the Middle East, but if she brings me an opportunity in UK, I'll open up that opportunity. The same thing with my American gallery. So I work with everyone in a very transparent way, but they focus on their region. But if they bring me an opportunity first, then they're the ones that get that opportunity. Or there's also a seniority. So for example, the galleries that I work with the longest, if they are going into the same show, I'll give it to the ones that have been with me the longest. So it's a matter of a discussion, but it's also a matter of having an open line of communication. The one thing I don't like about galleries is suffocating, the works of artists who are just starting out, or are sort of at a specific level in which this exclusivity thing does not make sense. So for example, for me, I can sell my work as well, but there has to be a traceability, which means that if a gallery does a show for me and a sale comes in, during that period, but that sale comes to my website of somebody asking, I'm going to ask, where did you see this work? Blah, 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 and so forth, But often if there's an exhibition and someone is asking from that specific collection, clearly that sale is going to go to the gallery, because they've invested the time and energy and money in order to make that happen. And I'll usually give like an extra month or 2 months, because there's always, people coming in last minute to buy things. But if a client comes in asking for work that is not being exhibited, or, they just found me online, then there's a traceability. Then I'll go back to the gallery and ask, has this person contacted you? Because sometimes what some people will do is that they think that they'll get a better deal with the artist.
I was just going to say
instead
that.
of going to the gallery, So for me, I'm very clear, like my discounts are 10%. That's where I stop,
Right.
So to me, then my question is, I ask the gallery, has this person contacted? If they can prove to me that there's an email trail, because often it's in an email, then that sale goes to the gallery. If there's no traceability, then we take on that client. So that's the flexibility that I believe of a way it works. And it's also a motivation for the galleries that if you're not going to sell my work, then I'm going to be selling my work. So I'm not going to have my work sitting in a place and you're not doing anything with it. But it's about honesty, trust, and transparency. These are the key things. And that's the kind of relationship that you want to form with your galleries. And these are sort of hard to come by as well. Not every gallery is honest either.
That's true. And I mean, I do think everything is about relationships at the end of the day. I mean, the other thing that I just wanted to mention from something
it's a marriage, by the way.
It really is. It really is. And I always feel that part of my job, like one of the most important parts of my job, is the questions I ask, because I try to get the artists to not only consider their work in different ways, but also tell me where they want to see their work. What do they want? Who do they want to meet? Where do they want their work to be? And I try to strive for that, for them. But the other thing I wanted to say about tracing your work, keeping an eye on your work, where are your editions, who has them, it's so important. And I know, believe me, I know I work with so many artists who have been in 1,000 festivals, and they come to me at a certain point and they say, I want this work to go into this institution now. And a lot of times that institution won't pick it up because they've seen it everywhere already, and they don't, unless it's really powerful, they're not really impressed, because they said, sort of like, oh, it's already been everywhere. But it is that thing where when you're in the art world, you want to be seen. So you want to get your work in front of people, but there's a balance they have to reach as well. And at the same time, you're doing so much when really, like what I usually say to artists is, you should be spending your time making work. That's what you should be doing. And that's what the role of the gallery is, to help you achieve that. And, we do the best we can. Some have more tools and more money available to facilitate that. But, it's so important to try to stay on top of where your editions are, who has them, what edition are you on, what have you sold. And so that's also where certificates of authenticity come in, where you have to create a certificate of authenticity when you sell a work, you keep a copy on file, so you know, okay, I sold edition 3 to that client in New York, and this is their address. I know where they live, so I know where that work is at least when I sold it to them. You know, so that you don't sell edition 3 times. You know.
Yeah. But I think it's also important for the galleries to have that transparency to provide that information. That's the request that we always have with every gallery, is that they give us the information of who the buyer is.
Oh, absolutely.
Granted that we're not going behind their backs, or selling other stuff to the client. So that's why I say it's trust is such an important factor.
Huge.
On this. Okay, so there's a question about if there needs to be a printing of all photos in the edition at once. For me, I don't print everything at once. I don't know how you feel about it, Peg.
I mean, I have never asked anybody to print everything at one time. I mean, one thing that I was going to mention as well when it comes to pricing and editions, I just wanted to touch on this because it's an idea that I have and I've seen it done. It's something that I'd like to do at some point. Is another way of looking at how you can present your work is maybe as a box set, or you can call it a portfolio if you like. I know a lot of artists do that when they're trying to raise money for books. They'll create a limited edition portfolio that might be a different size, but it's only, it's sold to help raise money to create a book, or it's sold for a specific reason, or because that body of work should be seen as a small edition as a collection and not single prints. It's a long-term story that really needs, each print needs the other for whatever reason.
Right.
That's another thing to consider, another way to consider your work.
Yeah. Very interesting. And then from my end, we have a couple more questions. From my end, I think for those that are here with us, when you sell that print, you always have to have a certificate and a sticker. This is how I do it. So the reason that we have these 2 points is that the value of that image has no value unless it has your signature attached to it. So in an ideal world, we would like to have our signature on the image. But for example, if you ship your work and it gets lost in the mail, or maybe the client says they didn't get it, or maybe they already got it, this prevents it. So from us, like what we do is the print gets shipped first, the certificate and the sticker gets shipped later. So that way we've separated those 2 things. But on the certificate, that's where you put the edition number, the title, the type of paper it's printed on, the type of machine it's on, and then with your signature and the dates and what have you. So that's an important factor before I forget. So somebody's asking, is it possible to sell your work without being represented by galleries? If yes, what are the best ways in addition to participating in photo festivals when it comes to document your body of work?
I mean, then it has to be sort of self-generated, I think, and if you're gonna do it without a gallery, then you need to have a very strong website. This is something that I wanted to mention too about your own self-promotion. If you have an Instagram site and it's your professional Instagram site, treat it like your professional Instagram site. If you want to have a site where you show pictures of your dinner and your dog and talk about things that are super important to you that don't relate to your work, have another Instagram site that is your private, but your public face you should consider it your shop window. That's what I used to always say about websites, is it's your shop window. Make sure it's easy to navigate. Make sure it's really easy to find how to get in touch with you. So many editors and curators look at Instagram now. From Instagram, they go to your website. If they can't find a way to get hold of you, you may lose them. And I mean, I know a lot of people are using these digital tools to find artists now. I know I do. So in terms of selling, you can have, and I would say, look around, because there are artists who sell from the website certain works. And but again, then it's all down to you. You have to make sure it's printed well, and I am really glad you brought up the issue about the sending certificates separately. That is for your protection. Anytime you sell a work, normally I would say sell it unframed, because it's much easier to ship and less likely to get damaged. That seems like common sense, but I think, I talk to a lot of collectors who come to me the first time collectors who will say, can I buy it framed? And then we discuss it. And, usually what we do is we ship directly to their framer so that When the client opens it, it's opened by the framer in the frame shop. There's less chance of damage, and it can be framed immediately to their specifications, or the artist can provide specifications. It's much easier for everybody. It's cheaper for the client. It's cheaper for the artist. It's easier to get it to an artist, to get a work to a client safely if it's unframed.
Somebody's asking, do they still have to deliver a certificate of authentication for each print, even if they have already signed and numbered the print? Does that add value to the print?
It depends on how they're going to frame it. The thing that I would say is that it's something that can be kept in a file and be kept safe. I would be very cautious about sending a signed, numbered print through the post. Even if you have a good courier, because again, if it's lost, that's your edition 2 gone, and you can't resell it because you don't know where it is, and it could show up at auction at another point in time. I don't know if that will happen, but it really could,
Yeah.
And it also, if somebody comes across it, if the package gets misdelivered and somebody opens it and realizes what it is, they may just put it in the back of the closet and keep it because they think it's worth something, and they may get lucky someday. But I honestly think the safer you can make the situation for yourself, the better. Nobody wants that headache,
Yeah. I don't know if I'm mistaken, but I know, like, for example, the value of a Rolex watch, having that authentication document for the reselling is such a crucial component besides just the physical aspect of the object. So in the end, it's like that's the added value. Okay, so last question, because we gotta get offline, is what are some cost-effective ways to start selling prints for beginners with limited budgets? I think Peg has mentioned that, your online visibility is so crucial. Your social media account is so crucial. And this is really, and I've said this many times, especially here to the students in Abidjan, is that you guys are the generation with access to the world. Access to a platform for free. You just need to have your data. So whereas Peg and I come from a generation where you had to make prints and send it to the editor, make copy negatives to a museum or a gallery just to be able to show your work. So right now, by a click of a button, you can send the work to anybody around the world. So but it's a marketing strategy. So the sooner everybody understands that you are running really a small business, basically, and the more business-minded you get and understanding how the market works, then that's how things I think will change. But marketing is such a huge component to it. But not only marketing, but understanding your rights, the copyright, understanding your valuation, understanding what the market is looking for, where the market is going. All these things are factors that, as I started this conversation, it's not just about making the work or pressing the button. There's a lot of work to be done after.
So much work. And the thing too is that, that's the thing. That's why I think it's important to get help when you can, get support when you can. Yes, there will be a commission, but if that person who's working with you is good, they're working for you, and that's how you pay them. It's not like you're sending that person a check every month for their hours. They're working for you on trust. When they sell, that's when they get paid. So that makes them work harder, But I it's something that really breaks my heart when I see artists that get to a point where they're producing, they're being recognized, they're being sold, and they have no one to support them. And that's when things go missing, because they can't do everything. They need an assistant, they need some support. And that's something that, that's the difficult part of being an artist, is that it's expensive to do what we do. And it's also time consuming, and to have to, most of us don't have the brains to do the administrative part. It's boring. We don't care. We don't want to do the accounting, but it can service us, it can protect us. So I think that's really important. You have to treat yourself with respect.
Yeah. But that's why I'm saying, use AI to the benefit of you. Everybody is always scared of AI, but I think, especially for running sole proprietorship or small businesses, there's so many tools inside of it that can help you on many ways. So I would encourage everybody to use the technology that they have. So I think that's about it. We can keep talking about this on and on. I think that just talking about paper, we can spend half an hour on paper.
Oh God, yeah.
Which type of paper and so forth. Well, that's another conversation for another day. So thank you so much, Peg. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for asking me.